Just had to check the date for a second. Good morning. This is the October 26th meeting of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And this is our briefing session. We'll start with the Director Baza. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome members of the board to your monthly meeting here in Salt Lake City. We apologize for the short delay. We've had a lot of moving parts this morning with the technology, and it's always great when it finally comes together and works. Along those lines, what we've got for you this morning, I think, is something special. I'm going to introduce in just a moment a couple of gentlemen from Oklahoma City who are going to brief you live on the actions of their two organizations. I think this is important because as we've evolved with our media efforts here with these board hearings, I think this is an example of how we can be most efficient with state time and resources, but also it gives you an example of how far we can extend our reach and reach, frankly, all corners of the globe with the things we're doing here in Utah. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce two fellows. Each of them represent an individual organization that Utah is a member of. The first is the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, and the fellow that is going to represent them this morning is Mr. Jerry Baker, who's the Associate Executive Director for the IOGCC. And secondly, we have Mike Pape, who's the Executive Director of the Groundwater Protection Council. They're going to give you a little overview of their two organizations, but also the efforts of a collaborative initiative that was started by the two organizations a couple of years ago. So fellas, go ahead and indicate who you are, and I think we're seeing you live at this point.
Having us here.
Associate Director,
Greetings.
Associate Executive Director for the IOGCC. And secondly, we have Mike Pape, who's the Executive Director of the Groundwater Protection Council.
John, can you hear me live?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry about the technical glitches. You know, there are always little bugs there everywhere. I'm Jerry Baker, Associate Executive Director of the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. My friend and colleague Mike Pape is here in his offices, live from Oklahoma City, and we're happy to be able to reach out to you through the marvels of technology and share with you about what we're doing. When you say Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, there are only a handful of people who even have a remote idea about what that means. But what it means is that states came together as permitted under the Constitution to compact with each other, as the Constitution provides, in order to address common issues. Back in 1935, if we can throw a slide up, that's available, I'll walk you through a couple of bullet points, but we were formed by 6 governors in 1935, all who had oil and gas production, Texas, Oklahoma, and other states. Since then, we have grown to 38 member states and associate members, and they represent virtually 38 member states. They represent about 99% of the oil and gas production onshore in this country. And we have members, as you would imagine, from Alaska to California, and from New York to California and Texas. So we're represented well throughout the United States, as is the GWPC, and I know Mike will talk about that. Back in 1935, when the organization was formed, there literally was no oil and gas regulation. It sprang from no industry to a huge industry, and so our organization was formed to minimize the waste that was occurring because the resources being overproduced, and there were no spacing, there were no environmental regulations, and the states came together and said, by the way, under threat of the federal government coming in to regulate oil and gas, the states came together to say, we can do this, we want to regulate the resources within our borders. So that's what formed us. We're a states' rights organization. We believe in state people. We believe in state government, and we think that that's the best and closest place to regulate. Mike Paik is going to talk a little bit about the Groundwater Protection Council in the next slide, and we'll talk about then how we came together as two separate organizations to address common needs.
Thanks, Jerry, and thank you, John, again for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to all the folks there today. So the Groundwater Protection Council is 34 years old, and we are an organization of state regulatory agencies. Both the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Environmental Quality in Utah have been longtime members of the Groundwater Protection Council. We have about 43 state members, and I can tell you with at great pride that the state of Utah has been engaged in the Groundwater Protection Council through John Baza's office and his predecessors almost since inception. And John Baza currently sits on our board of directors, and that's I think an honor because our board are elected by their peers across the United States. So in order to get on our board of directors, you have to be elected by, in John's case, other oil and gas directors in the western part of the United States. Just real quickly, the Groundwater Protection Council is very unique, and it's really a testimony to the states that founded the Groundwater Protection Council those 34 years ago. It's an amalgamation of state oil and gas agencies, or 13 of them on our governing board. We have, I think we have all oil and gas states, in fact I know that as members, and 12 persons from around the country that run, for lack of a better word, water divisions that have large water programs in the state. And so when the Groundwater Protection Council, and our focus is on groundwater, when the Groundwater Protection Council comes together to make a statement or do a study, and you've got 13 oil and gas directors and 12 water division directors in a room, when they decide something, you can take it to the bank. And so we've, thanks to the construction of the board of directors and the membership, we've gotten some notoriety. Over all these years, and I won't read anything on the screen, you can read that on your own, but we've been involved in a countless number of regulatory negotiations, whether it's on underground injection control, recently on hydraulic fracturing, congressional testimony, lots of work on the state UIC programs, defending the state programs nationally, and really recently, aquifer exemptions were very engaged, and John and his staff are well aware of this in the issue of aquifer exemptions as they affect oil and gas production and solution mining. And then lastly, and I'll let this for another, hopefully another meeting, we've developed a national database management system called risk-based data management, and Utah's system is heralded as the most current and efficient system in the United States, and there's heavy competition. And I'll let John and his staff tell you about that another time. So we're very proud of that risk-based data management system that helps the state oil and gas agencies run their system. So let me go on just briefly on the joint venture that was formed between the Groundwater Protection Council and the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission about 3 years ago. Excuse me. And it's called States First, and it literally is a joint venture, a legal agreement, a joint venture between the governing boards of each organization. And it occurred to many of us, many on the joint boards, and we have overlapping members. John Vaza would be a good example of a member of both boards of directors. It's obvious to you all, but we felt it wasn't as obvious to the citizenry in some parts of the country, maybe every oil and gas producing state, that state agencies and state boards and state commissions are really they're continuously engaged in regulatory improvement. That's what you do when you get together every month, and that's why you exist, and that's a constant state of affairs to improve state regulations so they can reflect new technologies, new drilling procedures, in some cases new regulations. And the states are actually incubators for regulatory innovation. And again, that's pretty obvious to all of us, but we felt the two organizations that perhaps it wasn't obvious enough to the rest of the country. You there on the commission are the first to react in a situation where there has to be first responders. It's the state agencies' duty to do that. You know your geology better than anybody else, anybody in Washington, D.C. certainly, and quite frankly and quite simply, you know what's best for Utah. So we formed the State's First Initiative, and what you see on the screen in front of you are 5 pillars, that, as we call them, that make up the State's First Initiative, overseen by the two organizations. And I'm just going to talk about 2 real quick. If you look to the far left under underground injection control, you'll see peer regulatory assessments. Those are Class 2 saltwater disposal well peer reviews that are conducted, and they're quite extensive. The GWPC, prior to States First, did a peer review, a UIC peer review, where 2 persons from another state come in and look at a third state's UIC program according to a significant set of guidelines, and then do an assessment of it. And we finished the first round 10 or 12 years ago, and began a second round of those peer reviews under the State's First flag in 2015. And I'm happy to tell you that the first person to stand up and the first state to stand up to say, come and look at our UIC program, and we invite the EPA out. They don't make judgment, but they're a kind of a passive observer. But the first state to stand up for round 2 and say, come and look at us, was Utah. And so there is a UIC peer review that John and his staff have, and I'm sure they can give you copies. So we're quite proud of that, and we're now on our 5th state, and eventually we'll get to most all the significant oil and gas states. Those peer reviews are sent to the EPA, and what they show the EPA is the good job that the states are doing in the underground injection control program. They're available to the public, they're available on the website, and I think the only thing we haven't done enough of is let the world know that those things are out there, but they're very, very good. And then the second thing I'll talk about is Frac Focus, and I know you all are aware of Frac Focus. Frac Focus is about 5.5 years old, and when it began, it actually was a thought in the mind of a couple of oil and gas companies, and they came to us and they said, hey, we really don't mind the public knowing the chemicals in frac fluid, and we're more than willing to disclose those, but we need a neutral place to put that information. We can't put it on our company websites, no one will believe us. No one state agency at that time was going to do it. So they said, and I love to use this phrase, could you develop a electronic cardboard box so we could put all this information in it? And we set about doing that, Jerry Baker and myself and the 2 organizations, working with a variety of states and the industry and even some environmental NGOs, and developed what's now known as Frac Focus. So if I can have the next slide. So in 5.5 years, on the far left you'll see April 2011, on the far right you'll see July let's say August 1st, this past summer, over that period of time, there have been recorded 115,125 fracture procedures for which the chemical constituents are known. And that's huge. That's just absolutely huge. And I think this is a real testimony to the state's first process to get out ahead. This is a good example of what I mean when I say to get out ahead and be innovative and set the standard for how things should be done. And obviously Utah is a part of this. If I can have the next slide. If you look 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, there you are, Utah, and you've got recorded in those years, looks like 4,070 procedures. You could guess number 1 right below you there is Texas at a little over 55,000. I think Oklahoma and Colorado are in there. But the important point is that the states here get some credit, and no one's hiding anything, and we're letting the world know that those fracture procedures exist. So how do we show that? Let me have the next slide. First of all, this is just a step back. Here's just a growth chart to show that over these approximately 5 years, we've got, if you just ignore the bottom number for a moment, the top one is the important one. We've got 1,408 companies participating in Frac Focus in the United States of America. And that's every major. There are no majors that aren't engaged in reporting to it, and all the mid-majors and the independents. And what happened along the way, and Utah is one of these states, is you adopted Frac Focus as a regulatory standard. And we have 24 states in the United States wherein the submission of fracture chemicals to the state regulatory agency is a rule. In some states it's a statute. But I think that's another example of the states getting out ahead of some of the public's desires and keeping ahead of the federal government in this case. None of us would want to see the federal government developing this kind of a database, and if I can be a little humorous, I would suggest that if they started in 2011, it might not be done yet. But the next slide this is what the public sees. Now the colors are different on this. They go on the Frac Focus and look for Utah and look for a well by county or start date or API number or operator name in the upper box there. Anyway, the public wants to look at this. You look at it on a smartphone, an iPad, a computer, you name it. They can go on and find this information on every fracture procedure in Frac Focus. And on I won't go into the nuances of the large chart, but what that does, it's called the systems approach, and the information above the big wide white line in the middle are supplier names and trade names and purposes of where certain ingredients are used, and below that is a full representation of all the chemicals that go into a fracture procedure. And we went to this kind of a system to minimize the number of trade secrets that were needed to be claimed by the industry. Something we don't certainly object to, that's a state issue, but working with the industry and the big service companies, we came up with this system to help them and increase their comfort level for reporting all the chemicals that are used in hydraulic fracture procedure. So, and that would certainly apply to Utah. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Jerry Baker to talk about the state's first initiative.
Yeah, let me tag on to what Mike just said. I mean, it truly was an amazing voluntary process for oil and gas companies and service companies to come together and say, at the encouragement of two organizations, to say that, yeah, we'll voluntarily figure out how to disclose these chemicals if you can provide the means by which to do it. And I can remember at least one meeting, Mike, where we're sitting around the table, and the analogy I used was, I want my wife is a smart woman. I'd like her to be able to look on a website if there's a well being drilled next to our house, now what's going on there. And so that's kind of the design we started with. It was supposed to be user friendly, and so what started as a tool for industry became a real tool for transparency that allows individuals like those of us. I'm not a technical person, but I can look on that website and find information that heretofore was really unknown and a subject of speculation. Nowadays, you don't hear anybody talking about disclosure of frac chemicals anymore because it's become a widespread use of the frac-focused technology. I will talk a little bit about a couple of things. As Mike mentioned, the aspect been greatly supported by every resource that we could lay our hands on, thanks to John and Dan Jarvis, who is instrumental in the process really strongly, which is on the foot soldiers, you might say, who are on the ground looking at oil and gas operations, looking at plugging, looking at MIT testing, every number of things that they do for a living. I think those people are our front line. They represent all of us to the public and to the operators, and I'm very proud to be a part of the inspector training and certification process. Dan Jarvis, we enlisted him to help lead what we call a inspector forum that we've held twice. The first one was in very own Utah, where we brought inspectors from all over the country together, one from each state, to talk about commonalities, common concerns, common problems, common opportunities. And from that, we have broadened it to include some additional sub-training opportunities. And we have developed a certification test, and my personal goal is to have every oil and gas inspector in the country be certified. One thing that you will probably hear from some of the opponents to oil and gas development and operations is that inspectors are not well trained. I take serious issue with that, and I think a certification process demonstrates that to the world, that inspectors are well qualified. They do a great job in all kinds of conditions, under all kinds of problems that they deal with virtually every day. So that is, we're working with through really
Jerry, we have some communication problems. Hang on just a second.
universities, one Interstate, who have assembled.
That's a much better slide than the old one. Yeah, this is good. Yeah, that's good.
Oklahoma, if you could go ahead and continue. We're having the audio drop out. It may be if you could step a little closer to your microphone unit there.
Let's try a little test. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay, I was talking about the oil and gas training curriculum. We've been in close contact for the last 3 years probably with 3 prestigious universities: University of Texas, Penn State, and Colorado School of Mines. Those of you who are familiar with the oil and gas world would recognize those 3 as real leading entities in the oil and gas world. And they, with our encouragement, developed a training for newer inspectors that helps broaden their knowledge about what's expected of them, and helps arm them with what they need to do to be effective in the field. They have secured industry funding to offset the costs, and I know Utah has sent a number of people to the training. I hope that they found it valuable. Our feedback from inspectors has been really good across the board. So that's something we hope to continue to improve and expand on. Probably one of the, and I'll move to continuous improvement through SOGR. That's what we, it's an acronym for State Oil and Gas Regulatory Exchange, SOGR. We believe that that is the epitome of states working together to help anticipate and solve problems. The idea is principally to have states work together through a number of programmatic opportunities to where you can help states with the continuous process of improvement. State-to-state consultation, for example. Let's just use a recent example. I think maybe Idaho would be a good one, where Idaho came to us and they wanted SOGR to look at their regulations and see if we thought they were effective enough for what they're doing. And so we're in the process of doing that without any, it's a peer process. So you're dealing with the people who are know exactly what they're talking about, understand how to write regulations, understand what the problems are. And so we're helping Idaho, Illinois, other states work through their regulations to make sure that they're on a path of continuous regulatory improvement. Utah, again, was a leader in a local forum there where you talked about spacing in relation to horizontal drilling. We had some state people come to that. You had industry people, and we had an excellent meeting where we kind of talked about ideas from everywhere and brought those together in a forum that really worked well. I hope was helpful to Utah in its formulation of state policy. Two other recent examples have been the use of our working groups through SOGR to look at induced seismicity issues. That's a big problem. I don't think you have that there, but in Oklahoma for sure, Texas, Ohio, and other states, we were able to convene a working group of experts not only in oil and gas, but in seismicity and underground injection, and to formulate a very significant document that talked about what the potential impacts of injection and seismicity might be. It was a groundbreaking effort, I think, on behalf of both organizations. And now we have in light of the Aliso Canyon incident in California, if you're aware of that, that's a gas storage blowout that burned, well, essentially is a year ago and scared the bejeebers out of a lot of people, rightfully so. We've assembled a work group to formulate what we call considerations that state regulators and federal regulators can use to better control the gas storage issues in the state. Some of those facilities are aging, and we need to revisit those regulations. We're in the process of doing that. But we were able to bring in both of those instances more than 100 people together to get all ranges of thoughts: academics, industry, environmentalists, government, federal and state, to come together in a wide open forum to talk about ideas on how to do things better. So that's our notion of SOGR and continuous regulatory improvement. I do want to say, and I think Mike's going to talk a little bit about our final pillar here, which is a even more recent item in our portfolio of stuff. But I wanted to say before I got away from it was that John Baza is a member of our, he represents Governor Herbert in our organization. He is one of 38 or so appointees of the governor, and in that position he acts on behalf of of your Governor Herbert. He was appointed about 10 years ago by Governor Huntsman and has served ever since. I'll have to brag on him a little bit because he is a winner of our most prestigious award for a state regulator, and that's the E.W. Marland Award. So he's an important participant in our organization. And so with that, Mike, if you want to talk us through the science and technology transfer, we've got news on that front.
And this will wind down our briefing, in case some of you are getting worried we're going to go on forever. But on science and technology transfer, one of the exciting things we're doing is working with the U.S. Department of Energy and all the state members across the board of the two organizations and the water agencies that are part of GWPC. And we're talking about innovative ways of looking at oil and gas produced water. There were produced last year about a trillion gallons of water were brought to the surface as a part of oil and gas production. And there are a number of folks around the country, our Governor Fallon here in Oklahoma, with regard to trying to find other places for water than injection in some of our highly seismic induced areas. Just as one example, is we're looking for ways to, or possibilities for using produced water. Now it's out there a little bit, and we do get that. We've got good scientific people working with us, national labs working with us, some environmental NGOs, scientific NGOs, and we've gotten 2 forums behind us so far where we bring experts together and talk about the art of the possible, kind of a waste not, want not. In times of significant drought, it's hard not to ask oneself in oil country, when you know this much water is being produced, is there not some way through technological innovation and the right economics and the appropriate rules and statutes that might be needed to protect the public, is there not something we could do with some of this water? So it's out on the edge, and we're working on it, but I think it's just a good example of looking at emerging technologies and applying them in the area of produced water for water supplementation in dry or drought-stricken areas. So with that, I think that's the end of our formal briefing this morning, and we're happy, obviously, to continue the discussion and answer any questions anyone might have.
Board members, any questions?
What are some of the technologies that you're looking at to use this produced water?
You know, that's the hardest question you could have asked me, because there are so many technologies, and I quite frankly can't keep up with them. We really depend on the oil and gas industry and the water treatment industry and the water reuse industry. But some of the obvious ones, like the ever-changing and very old, actually, reverse osmosis is changing just by the year. Filtration, any number of, we've had some presentations on distillation, which really isn't economically pragmatic. But there are any number of kinds of treatment, and there are more than anecdotal examples of where produced water is being used today. There's some cotton production in Texas where they're using low TDS water. There are a couple of projects in California where they have fairly good quality water, and they're using that water for some animal feedstocks and in the southern Central Valley. There's also an example of in the high plains where produced water with a low TDS, so I'm saying not a lot of treatment here, can be used for rangeland recharge because the plants can take the TDS level.
Other questions?
I was just wondering, aren't there some technologies from Israel to do this? They're doing desalination.
Israel's been doing desalination. That's probably one of the most progressive and innovative countries in the world throughout the entire Middle East, and that you make a good point. And I think one of the companies that's done a lot of work in Israel is General Electric, And General Electric is part of our group that's looking at technologies, water treatment technologies. But that's a good point.
One follow-up question to that. What percentage of that trillion gallons produced a year would be lower TDS waters that might have a beneficial use with mineral treatment?
I'm going to take a real chance here and tell you 20%. And I'm guessing. I've slept since I heard that number, but I'm going to say it's about 20%. And it's got to be in the right place. I mean, we all understand that. You can't take water in Pennsylvania where they don't need it and put it in northern New Mexico. So, and part of a study that we're doing is locating that lower TDS water and matching it up with drought conditions or potential need. I mean, it's economics.
Thank you.
Other questions? John, back to you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Gill and members of the board. I really wanted to highlight the ability for us to interact with these two esteemed gentlemen and their organizations. We have meetings, on-site meetings with both of these organizations throughout the year. I just recently attended the IOGCC conference in Little Rock, Arkansas, and earlier in September there was a groundwater protection annual meeting in Orlando, Florida. And if I had my druthers, I would have every member of the board and many members of our staff participating in those meetings. Because as you can see from the briefing today, we deal with some meaty issues and things that are affecting the actions of this board in a very real way. So without being able to send people across the country to these meetings, I think being able to use the technology as we've seen it used today, we can expand upon this and we can find ways to get more people involved in our organizations and extend our reach to the people that need to have this information to make proper decisions in the regulatory scheme. So I want to thank both Mike and Jerry and the two organizations for the briefing today. You fellows are welcome to stay online and watch the rest of the briefing session as it's conducted, but we're going to move on to the next item now. So thank you very much.
Before you do that, I think I speak for the whole board in expressing our appreciation for what you're doing, for the tough issues you're addressing, and for the nice things you say about John Baza. We feel the
Yeah,
same
he paid
way.
us for that.
Well, we figured that out
Mr.
already.
Chairman, let me just add that were it not for guys like you and your board, doing the right thing for states, nothing that we would do would make any difference at all. We rely on our member states. You guys are the front line. We understand that. We're here to support you. So at any time, if you have any needs or questions for us, we'd be happy to respond. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
a good point.
well,
We're not regulators. You are. And we're here to help.
Let me make one comment. I've been to a number of the IOGCC meetings, and they were so educational and helpful for me in looking at ideas and background information and then addressing real issues. Because of budget cutbacks, our board can't go, but it would be wonderful if we could view the meetings as they proceed and perhaps call John Baza, who would be on site with you about that. And so I'll just have you think about that.
We'll work on that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Baza.
Okay, well, we're going to continue with our briefing, and there's only really one more item that I have to put on the table with you, and that is the proposed hearing schedule for 2017 and then January of 2018. We distributed this to board members last month, asking you to check your calendars and see if you had any serious conflicts with any of the dates we had put down, we can certainly discuss that, but what we would like to do now is to just get your nod of assent that these dates look okay, and we'll go ahead and plan accordingly into the next year.
Board members, there will be conflicts, but having them, these dates this far in advance is really helpful to us as we put these meetings together. If you do have a conflict, the number one item here is a quorum. We understand that modern business and life takes you different directions, but so looking on the right, we're okay. On the left, okay. I think that's we'll have conflicts, but we'll go with these dates. John, if that'd be okay.
Let us know well in advance, and we'll do our best to try to minimize any potential conflicts that may occur. I know that I mentioned this to you before. We would like to start having a field hearing or two as the year progresses, so we'd like to incorporate that into the schedule for board hearings as well.
Thank you.
The only other item that I would bring up to you is it has to do with the holiday social open house that we talked about last month. And we hadn't heard a lot back about the board's preference on that, but I think, you know, without any further advice from you, we'll plan on doing that the evening of the December board meeting, which I think is scheduled for December 7th, and that's a Wednesday. So after the board meeting is over with, we'll do what we did last year and open up the doors of the auditorium and invite public and staff members to come and just have a nice evening of refreshments with the board.
Board members, any response or comments on that? It was a big success last year. We'd encourage doing it again.
Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done with the briefing this morning, but I know that there are probably a couple of members of the public who are interested in speaking with the board during the comment period.
Okay. This is now the time and place for any member of the public to address the board on matters that are within our jurisdiction or that you deem necessary for us to know. So if you would like to speak to the board, would you please come to this mic right over here? And for everyone in the audience, if you have a chance to speak today, all of our hearings are recorded. I get to hear what goes into that. And I'm just going to remind you that if you almost touch the mic with your lips, you're just about right. And so I may ask you to get closer to the mic. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lee Peacock. I'm with the Utah Petroleum Association. I just wanted to make the board aware of an issue that has come to our attention and kind of grabbed some of the focus for the industry in the Uinta Basin. The town of Ballard, which lies just to the east of Roosevelt City, it's actually across the line in Uinta County, right there at the county line. Late last fall, very quietly, passed several changes to their oil well drilling ordinance, the city ordinance pertaining to oil and water well drilling. It was subsequently modified this spring, and in doing so, there was very little public notice or fanfare, with virtually no industry nor public comment in the process. We, as a trade association, weren't even aware of these changes until later this summer. And as we discussed amongst industry, we realized that these ordinances pose a real problem for future oil and gas development in Ballard City. Interestingly enough, it's right in the middle of where some of the only current activity lies right now. There is current drilling in the area and significant future interest. The City Council passed these ordinances which we believe impinge on the authority that the legislature has vested to both the board and the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. We realize that there is a role for local ordinances, especially dealing with nuisance items, but we believe that these ordinances have gone well beyond that, even somewhat to regulating siting and spacing issues and downhole operations for oil and gas operators. That being said, the City Council has, upon inquiry, has opened up and asked for comments and participation from industry. Just yesterday, we submitted comments to the city outlining our concerns with the ordinance. The reason I bring it to the board is depending on the outcome of these discussions with the city, I'm hopeful that they'll just take a fresh look at what they've done, and my hope, quite honestly, would be that they repeal the entire ordinance and we just start over having a discussion on what is appropriate for the state to govern and what is appropriate for local ordinance to cover. That would be the best case scenario, and we just have an open, productive dialogue and come up with something that's agreeable to all of the stakeholders. Absent that, we may want to look further at having the board and the division take a very active role in this, because we do believe that it impinges on what your responsibilities are pertaining to oil and gas operations in the state. So I just wanted to make the board aware of that. We'll keep you updated as this process goes on, and if there's any further action in the future, we'll be in touch. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take any.
Well, Mr. Braxton, why don't you go next?
Yes, thank you.
And
Lowell
we'll have
Braxton,
questions for both
representing
of you.
Western Energy Alliance. I'm very careful not to get my lips too close to the microphone that Lee's lips have been next to, but short of that, I want to echo what Lee said. I think it's an important issue. It appears that, pardon me, the city is overriding some of the state regulations. I'm not sure that industry can fight this battle alone, and we'd appreciate any help from the state of Utah that we can get to clarify your authorities and allow this thing to go forward smoothly. Thank you.
Board members, any questions for these gentlemen? Just an observation. Over the years, this has been an issue, and the legislature addressed that when they put into the statute some very strong language. I can't quote it, but it was basically, notwithstanding any other provision of state law, the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining and the division under this chapter has that jurisdiction. But when they were passing that, they said what we want is one-stop permitting process. You go to one agency and you get as many of the permits as you can, and you want to avoid duplicatory. So if you need a policy statement or some action of this board, we would request that you initiate that through the process, and then we will address it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, to some this may seem like a small local matter, and to some extent it is, but we've all seen examples in other states of how small local issues become very large statewide issues that kind of catch fire and can move through communities, and we want that to not be the case. Utah, from a regulatory standpoint, is a friendly place for our industry to do business, and we hope to keep it that way. I should also mention that the royalty owners have been apprised of this. They're really the ones who stand to lose significantly from companies taking their capital dollars elsewhere because of local rules. If those minerals aren't developed, there are a lot of mineral property rights owners out there that would lose out dramatically. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, maybe, yeah, the Utah Royalty Owners Association was not even aware of this either until Lee brought it up at our meeting out in Duchesne a while back. And so, yeah, the Royalty Owners Association is engaged in this discussion, and will be, representing. There's many local people out there who have mineral rights who had no notice of any of this going on, and so we're glad that Ballard City's hopefully starting the process over to discuss it. So,
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else like to address the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Styler here again on behalf of Kinder Morgan. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board. We have today on the agenda, there's an additional item that will be for your consideration. We just want to express our appreciation to the board, to staff, Director Baza and his team. We believe that we've been able to solve some problems, and we're very grateful for all the help that they've offered us in this, and just want to express that publicly. So thank you.
Thank you. My understanding is that there is complete agreement by regulators, companies, operators. This has been a very successful scoping process, rule development process, and now we're looking at the final adoption. Is that correct?
That's correct. And obviously, our timing was a little bit odd in this one. The public comment period is closed as far as the rule and whether it should be approved or denied. But from our experience, we could say that we worked directly with staff, with those that were interested parties on all sides, and were able to collaborate and find what we believe is a great solution. So yes, that's correct.
Good, thank you. We're going to take a break now. We'll come back about 10 after 10. Well, that'll give time for the first docket item, which is PATMOS Energy. I think the only thing we're going to do on that is a motion, and then we will go to the. Have the rulemaking. Say again. We have the rulemaking first. And then we have the rulemaking, and then we'll go to the EP Energy. Would like to work with council a little bit before the EP Energy, just to figure out the steps of how we'll go forward during the day. So with that, we'll take a quick break and allow the parties to get set up electronically.